March 19th, 1944, outside Cassino, Italy. The ground was a sea of brown sludge. Rain hammered down, turning craters into shallow graves. A Sherman tank, call-signed Betty Lou, sat half-buried in the muck, smoke curling from her engine deck. Inside the cramped steel belly, the crew was gasping for air. Private Al Dorsey, 21 years old and fresh from Ohio, blinked through a haze of burnt oil. An 88mm had just slammed into the rear vent, the tank's soft spot, the one they all dreaded. But something was off. Instead of flames, there was nothing. The engine coughed once, twice, then came back alive with a growl. "Holy hell," the mutter muttered, "we're still running?" They should have been dead. The 88mm round should have sliced through that radiator grill like a hot knife through butter, showering molten metal into the engine and setting the whole compartment ablaze. But Betty Lou was still rolling, still fighting. As the gunner reloaded, the crew didn't know it yet, but their survival wasn't luck. It was the result of a mechanic 5,000 miles away in Detroit who had noticed something others had missed. A man named Leo Connelly. A name no one on that battlefield would ever hear, but one that quietly saved their lives.
Detroit, Michigan, winter of 1943. Leo Connelly was a quiet man with rough hands and a grease-stained uniform. He'd spent the last 20 years fixing radiators, gearboxes, and carburetors in a little auto shop off Jefferson Avenue. When the war came, the shop closed its doors, and Leo joined the thousands of factorymen flooding into Detroit's new war machine. The Ford Rouge plant had been transformed into an industrial fortress, churning out M4 Sherman tanks at a pace no one thought possible. For most, it was a job. For Leo, it was personal. His younger brother, Eddie, was serving in North Africa in a Sherman. Letters came home every few weeks, each one describing how the tanks burned too easily when hit from behind. One night, after reading yet another letter about a crew lost to a single rear hit, Leo walked back to his bench and stared at a dismantled radiator housing. He ran a calloused hand over the vent slats, the same kind used to cool the Sherman's massive Continental engine. That's when he saw it. The vent was wide and unshielded, a straight, perfect path for incoming shrapnel. It didn't take a genius to see it. One lucky shot through that opening, and the tank's heart was exposed. Leo leaned back, thinking like a mechanic, not a soldier. "If you can't block it, maybe you can bend it," he muttered. He grabbed a length of steel tubing from the scrap pile, a simple exhaust pipe from a decommissioned truck, and began to shape it with his hammer. Hours later, a curved, elbow-like pipe sat in his hands. It wasn't elegant, but it was clever. The pipe would be welded inside the vent, curving downward. If an armor-piercing shell entered, it would ricochet against the curve, deflecting shards away from the engine and out the opposite side. Simple, crude, brilliant. The next morning, Leo brought his makeshift solution to his foreman. "Sir," he said, "I think I found a way to stop those rear hits from killing the tank." The foreman barely looked up. They were behind schedule, and no one had time for garage ideas. But Leo wouldn't drop it. He built a small model, welded his pipe inside, and begged for one field test. After weeks of pushing, one engineer finally agreed, mostly to shut him up. They took a damaged Sherman hull to the edge of the proving ground and fired a few test rounds into the radiator grill. The first shell entered clean and pinged off something inside. Instead of slicing through the compartment, the fragments deflected harmlessly to the side. They fired again. Same result. The curved pipe was redirecting the shrapnel. The engineers stood in stunned silence. Leo grinned, half embarrassed, wiping his hands on his coveralls. "Guess the curve makes it dance a little," he said. Within days, the modification, now nicknamed Connelly's curve by the factory crew, was quietly added to the production line. No big announcement, no patent. Just a few extra welds per tank, done by men who barely knew what they were installing. The paperwork called it a vent deflection system. Leo just called it the pipe trick.
By spring of 1944, thousands of Shermans rolled off the lines with Leo's curved pipe welded inside. It was invisible to most, hidden beneath armor and oil, but its effects began to show on the front lines. Tank recovery crews started reporting something strange. Shermans hit in the rear were surviving. Engines still running, fires minimal. In field reports, commanders noted improved engine resilience without knowing why. In Italy, Betty Lou was one of the first. In Normandy, dozens more. In France, hundreds. And yet, Leo never knew. Back in Detroit, he just kept welding and repairing. His brother Eddie came home wounded, his tank burned out, from an earlier model, one that hadn't yet carried Leo's invention. When Eddie limped into the factory to visit, Leo didn't tell him, didn't mention the pipe, or the test, or the quiet change sweeping through Allied armor divisions. He didn't need to. For Leo, the satisfaction came from knowing that somewhere, some other brother might be coming home because of a pipe he'd bent on a cold Detroit night.
After the war, the tank plant slowed, then stopped. The world moved on, but the pipe trick stayed. Post-war military engineers reviewing battlefield data noted that late-war Shermans had a 20% higher survival rate from rear impacts. The vent redesign became a standard feature in later armored vehicles, though no one could quite recall where it started. Leo Connelly went back to fixing Buicks and Chevys. No medals, no interviews. Just a quiet pride whenever he saw a tank on parade. Years later, when asked by a friend what he did during the war, he just smiled and said, "Kept engines running." He never mentioned that his little curve of steel may have kept men running too.